Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hourglass's series, Listening to Lancaster. We're here today with Joe Landis, Executive Director and co-founder of the Tech for Good nonprofit ReHome. ReHome's mission is to help communities like Lancaster County become places where every immigrant neighbor who arrives through a humanitarian program has a stable home base as they rebuild their lives and give back. Rehome's approach is to use housing platform technology, think platforms like Airbnb, to match available rental housing units with recently arrived refugees who are connected to supports they may need to succeed as tenants. Joe, welcome. Thanks so much for having this conversation with me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I just moved back to Lancaster County, and it's wonderful to get the chance to directly engage with my home community.
I love that. That's great. I figured a good place to start is can you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about you?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, moving back to Lancaster County, this is home. I'm the descendant of an Anabaptist slash Mennonite family who arrived here in the county as refugees. We were resettled here in the 1700s. I actually got the chance earlier this year to go to Switzerland and see the home of one of my ancestors, Hans Landis. This is a picture that's on my journal that I carry around every day as I work on ReHome. And it's just a good reminder of the fact that my family and I got the chance to rebuild. And I was able to grow up in security. And I want to pay that forward to others. So my family were the product of refugee resettlement. My dad was also part of the first efforts to resettle Vietnamese refugees here in Lancaster during the Vietnam War. And that was before even the federal government was funding a resettlement program. Um, so, now we know that Lancaster's become this refugee capital of the USA. And in addition to just the family history ties, I was able to directly benefit from a connection to an Iraqi refugee neighbor when I was still in high school, who gave me the chance to start learning Arabic and fell in love with that language. Ended up moving to Jordan to carry on the tradition of being involved in refugee work, and worked there for a few years after undergrad at Swarthmore College, working with national and international organizations in the camps for Syrian refugees. That got me, really inspired and driven around the concept of refugee integration. 1 in 10 people in Jordan at the time were refugees. They just recently had to flee their homes. And it was very sobering to see the fact that they didn't have the right to work. They didn't have a pathway to permanent status. And fewer than 1% of refugees in that type of situation will ever get the chance to be resettled to a country like the US, like my family was. So that then made me really passionate about refugee resettlement right here, right now, as a major solution to the ongoing refugee crisis, which has just gotten bigger and bigger since then. And I became a city planner along the way because housing access is one of those major barriers that folks face, even after they've made it through the gauntlet. They've made it out of places like Jordan, here to communities like Lancaster.
Mm. And where did you become a city planner?
Yeah, I did it at MIT, but it's funny. I had in 2019 left Jordan with the intention of finding the right grad school. Um, had my passion for supporting refugees, and I had just been living in the capital city of Jordan, this huge city of 4.5 million people, really loving things like public transportation, thinking about housing systems, and so I looked around at the programs here in the States where I could study the intersection of the two, really study what communities can do practically to become places where opportunities are open to resettled refugees. And MIT has the oldest and largest planning program in the US. and also a really wide just diversity of what folks specialize in. So that was a good academic home for me.
What you just shared, I'm getting good threads of kind of the beginning story of ReHome, but I would love to hear in your words, how did ReHome and ReHome Marketplace start?
Yeah, so my first gig as a new city planner was working for the Planning Bureau here at Lancaster City, and I was able to continue doing that during my first year of studies at MIT because it was COVID, so everything was remote. That also enabled me to interpret regularly for Arabic speaking refugees who had arrived through our local resettlement agency, Church World Service. And I witnessed day to day as I was learning the field of city planning, learning about how things like housing access are essential to provide stability for the rest of life. I was seeing how the number one challenge for these clients at CWS after they arrived in the country was finding a welcoming landlord. Um, and yeah, a lot of folks were still facing housing insecurity even years after they arrived. So I actually had the chance to, in summer 2021, put a pause on my studies at MIT. I convinced them to give me a 3 semester leave of absence because there was a position that opened up at CWS Lancaster as the housing specialist there. It was great timing because this was also, I started working there just a week before the big push to resettle Afghans who had their lives put in grave danger. These are folks who worked for the US military and then were under direct threat from the Taliban after the Taliban took over their country back in August 2021. So really high volume of folks arriving here to Lancaster County. It's amazing. Lancaster County was really at the forefront of welcoming those folks. Um, and I was the person responsible for finding their first housing match. Um, Over the course of doing that, placing over 125 families into their first rental home, I really amassed a very long list of frustrations. I witnessed a lot of families in hotels burning through very, very limited financial support on these really expensive daily rates when that money could be going directly into like an investment in their future and their stability and success here through rental housing. So that was very frustrating that there was that gap and that disconnect. But I also became really full of hope because I saw how landlords really could step in and plug into that need, um, and and were stepping in and plugging into that need. It just wasn't quite enough, um, and that 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 ball of frustration and hopefulness is what I took with me back to my studies at MIT. Um, I showed up on campus there spring of 2023, I guess January 2023, holding those questions. And I ended up going to a lecture at the business school, which happened to be about tech platforms and marketplace platforms. Think Airbnb or Amazon, um, and how those are third parties that can help both sides of sometimes complicated sort of transactions. In Airbnb, it's someone, giving their space to a total stranger, for example. But they're they're a one-stop shop for the supports that are needed in order to make that really easy for both sides. And it struck me that, wow, like if something like that existed that I could have pulled from while working on the ground here in Lancaster, that really would have changed everything. And so it was a bit of an epiphany. And that's where the idea for ReHome was born. And my colleagues, my mentors, professors at MIT really rallied around it. So from the beginning of 2023, I sort of continued studying city planning, you know, gaining more expertise in that field, but alongside very direct, iterations of what this platform could look like, directly working with landlords and other stakeholders. And that's carried me through to today.
Mm, that's a really cool story. And I'm just curious if maybe you could walk us through like what people experience on the platform and then maybe also some challenges of the platform as as it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that my software developer co-founder, who I found up in Boston, and I developed was, it's like Airbnb, but for landlords who want to offer long-term leases to refugee tenants once they arrive here in the country. So that's a website, um, and the website is great for working with someone who's already sort of there, like they actively do want to find those newcomer tenants, um, and rather than you know going through the local resettlement agency, where folks are very busy, and they might not find the right match at just the right time. um, this is one platform where they can go, and we've created this customized process. It's just two steps on each side. So they make a listing that is based on our years of field research, just showing the resettlement providers who are working with families trying to place them into homes exactly the information that they would need in order to get a quick yes or no back to a landlord. Um, and then if they do want the unit, we have an application process that those folks can do that helps landlords understand the criteria like trustworthiness and ability to pay the rent on time for the full length of the lease. That, is really something on every landlord's mind. It's just that landlords usually assess those criteria through things like a credit score or a rental history here in the US. Um, there's not really any information to go off of with someone who's fresh in the country. So ReHome Marketplace gives them a really detailed breakdown of the income or projected income of the family, and then also the supports that they're getting from their resettlement agency for 5 years after they arrive. And especially in communities like Lancaster County, it's not just the resettlement agency, it's also many community organizations, many relatives, and established networks who are already here and can come alongside the family and their landlord to offer support.
Mm.
So ReHome Marketplace is really oriented around that decision point for both sides of will we go forward with this match and facilitate a move in. But that's not all that ReHome does. Sometimes there aren't enough landlords who are right there ready to offer their units on a platform like that. So we also are working with the resettlement providers themselves to more smartly do outreach to housing providers and advocate for them to meet the needs in real time. So that looks like, creating one pagers about families that can be distributed to church networks, things like that.
Mm.
I didn't get to the challenges yet, but that's kind of what the day-to-day services are that are on offer for users of ReHome or folks who come our way just via my email inbox. Um, the challenge has been, you know, a marketplace platform model um, really requires working with a lot of stakeholders.
Mhm.
Um, and in the case of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which is what made Lancaster County the refugee capital of the USA, it's what brought more than 100,000 refugee neighbors here to safety across the U.S. in 2024. Um, that represents the demand side of like this refugee housing market. Um, and my co-founder and I, um, really went all in on establishing relationships with the offices in that U.S. Refugee Admissions Program network. Offices like CWS Lancaster are in more than 180 communities around the U.S. And if we could get the folks who are in the position I used to work in onto our platform, then there really would be thousands of households available to landlords who want to offer their units and match. Um, and that's the place we reached by the end of 2024. We created an agreement with the national version of CWS to provide our software to their network of more than 40 offices, so that we would be their way to interface with landlords in their area. Um, Unfortunately, however, in January of 2025, almost all of those users were laid off from their jobs as the federal funding was just entirely frozen, cut off, and then the U.S. RAP, the Refugee Admissions Program, was just fully canceled for this year. Um, and so it's been a challenge to rebuild a platform that can work at scale. We've had to really pivot to working with a much wider range of organizations who are coming alongside neighbors. Um, and we've approached that as an opportunity, really. It was always true that housing is a journey after people arrive. It's not just about the first housing placement. Um, we were just sort of razor focused on that program that I knew really well. Um, but here in Lancaster, there are still thousands of households who are within their first few years of arriving here, and they're not just getting support from the resettlement team at CWS. They're getting
Mhm.
support from legal services teams there, but they're also connected to community organizations, cultural organizations, their own neighbors from similar language groups. And those are the types of users we're now focusing on for that demand side of the platform. Um, Along with that, we've decided to double down on Lancaster County because we have those relationships across that range here in this community. And it's going to take time to develop those um, in a really kind of dependable way for landlords across the country.
Mhm.
So that's
In
just
a
one of the
sense, it
challenges.
sounds like a lot of the networks that you had been building and a lot of those relationships, like nationally, would need to be entirely reformed and rebuilt in certain ways. And so focusing on Lancaster for the time being is a great way to kind of develop roots with this program. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a way also because we do still have connections across the country, and it's interesting. We have landlords coming to us across the country still, at least a couple each week, who want to list their unit and match with refugee tenants. Um, so so we know that we can directly apply
Mhm.
the learning and the new developments we build into our system to serve the community here in Lancaster County. We can apply that directly to benefiting the rest of the country on both sides, and that's that's really inspiring to me. I love to see this community sort of being able to be in the lead of something really important across the country like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Our time has gone by so quickly. And I have one other question that I'd love to ask you as sort of in the past, the Hourglass has done so many different things to address housing needs in Lancaster County, and then there's a lot of goodwill behind it, I would believe. I would love to just give you some time for calls to action if there are ways that people want to get involved, if they want to learn more about ReHome, if they want to support the efforts that you're doing. What are the best ways that they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We want ReHome to be an easy on-ramp for housing providers who want to be part of the solution, especially in 2025 as new neighbors are facing a lot of challenges. And so the most important and kind of actionable way that anybody can get involved and plugged in is if they have a housing unit, we're ready for them to list on the platform. Or if they know folks who have housing units, um, it doesn't even need to be a unit that's ready to rent right now. It means a lot to the demand side, folks who are looking for those housing opportunities, to know that there are more and more opportunities there, kind of in the bank here in Lancaster,
Mhm.
that they can access in the future. It helps to plan ahead. And speaking of planning ahead, you know, any of those housing units that are offered um, will have a huge impact. Right now, there's a group called Lancaster Refuge. They're grassroots. They're part of this kind of new system that we're plugged into. Um, they told me 2 weeks ago that they're well set up to bring families from Pakistan. These are Afghan families who are still under threat within Afghanistan and so fled to Pakistan and are living at constant risk of getting deported back to the threat of death back in their home country, um, but can be diverted from that and brought here to rebuild their lives in safety here. It's just that Lancaster Refuge knows that if a housing connection isn't available in advance, it's going to be too much for them to handle. And
Mhm.
so the call is if you provide a housing unit through ReHome to groups like Lancaster Refuge, you can directly help to save those lives. And aside from offering housing units, people can financially support our work. Um, we're part of the Extra Give here in Lancaster County for the first time this year, and our model has been a bit hard to I guess sell, for lack of better words, to to grants so far, especially before we got much more regionally focused here in Lancaster County. So we really need folks like mutual aid style, person to person, um, believing in the potential of this model and believing that, their dollars can really be transformed into open doors for neighbors right here in their community. So encourage folks to look into our Extra Give campaign coming up on November 21st.
Great. Joe, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you want to share as we're wrapping up?
Um, I think I want to make clear that connections to things like jobs um, or or connections to a neighbor who might not be on our radar, but who might be struggling. These are also absolutely relevant for people to reach out to me about,
Mhm.
um, because um, we'll integrate that into our databases. Uh, a lot of our system is set up to just kind of optimize bringing the right pieces together at the right times.
Sure.
And so didn't want to just limit it to housing or donations, but also those connections. We all really rely on connections to get ahead in life or to address crises that we face, and that's absolutely true for new neighbors as well.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah. So, to anyone who is listening to this, Joe is an open door for lots of different information, communication. So, hopefully, you'll be hearing from some folks in our audience. Joe, thank you so much for your time and sharing about your project. It's really cool to have someone come back to Lancaster and be working on something with so much impact. So appreciate your time and thanks so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to have this conversation, Leo.